Hi, welcome back to the CST 120 Video Dog and Pony Show. Today we're going to be talking about Part 2 using files. Now, what I need you to do, if you're watching this video and you want to play along, is to go to your Documents folder in a Windows Explorer window and open here with the command line. So we need to hold the shift while we right click on Documents and open up the command window. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. There we go. Just want to move it over just a little. Alright, now first thing you need to know about files, not just in the command line but on the Windows graphics system, is that file names can only be 255 characters. Excuse me. Which only sounds a little funny, but really I'm just kind of telling you that you don't have an unlimited amount of characters. Although most cases 255 characters is plenty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a command we're actually going to talk more about a little later called dir. I've used it before. dir gets me a list of all the items in a particular folder or directory. And got quite a few files listed here and some shortcut links. So when you see an item, if you've created a shortcut before, you know the default name, excuse me again, the default name is the name followed by a dash and the word shortcut. And you don't see the .lnk part here when you're using the graphical interface, usually. And we'll talk more about what the .lnk characters represent, and you'll see that there's other characters here like .bat, .co, .docx, and those are called file extensions, and we'll talk more about those in a little bit. But basically what I wanted to do is show you how long you can make file names and have them be readable without being too long. So for instance, I've got several files here like Miller Mark underscore, well, with underscores, Miller underscore Mark underscore Word underscore exam space V10 for version 10, version 2, and version 3, and so on. So notice you can have spaces in a file name. And I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit. You've probably used spaces when you're using the graphical interface, so that's not a big deal, but it can be a big deal in the command line. However, excuse me again. Before I talk about that, I want to make sure that I talk about the fact that just like when you're typing in commands, where the commands aren't case sensitive, your file names aren't case sensitive either. Now, both the command line and the graphical interface respect your choice of using upper or lower case characters, but it doesn't care. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to use the dir command again. And some commands you can actually supply file names for, and it makes sense. And we'll be talking about other commands. And I've used dir to simply get a list of the files in a particular location, well, the files in the directories. But you can also specify the dir command with a file name or file names to only show those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the dir command, and I'm going to hit enter a few times here to have a little bit more space displayed at the bottom. And I'm going to type dir Miller underscore Mark underscore Word underscore exam space, and I'm going to do v10.docx. Now, quickly, even though in the graphical interface, by default, you don't see the file extensions when you're working with the command line, the file extension is considered part of the file name. Well, it's always considered part of the file name. It's just that when you're working in the graphical interface, it's automatically read in when you double-click the file name. But when you're typing in commands, you have to remember to include that file extension since that is part of the file name. So what I've got here is the dir command with Miller_Mark_Word_exam space v10.docx. So let's see what happens. File not found. Well, I typed it in correctly, so what is the problem? The problem is, first off, the space. And so we're kind of going to mix here, talking about upper lowercase and spaces. So when you have a space in a file name and you're using it on the command line, it causes problems with at least some of the commands. So to actually get the command dir to recognize this as one file name and not two file names, because you don't have to have a file extension on a file name. If you want, well, I'm sorry, we'll be talking more about that later, but for now, you don't have to have a file extension on a file name. So, when you have a space in the file name, remember, when I talked about commands in Part 1 for CST120, I said that spaces separate the command name from the switches and any other options, and also file names. So as far as the dir command is concerned, we've actually typed in two file names. So what can we do? Well, when you have a file name that has a space in it, you have to include double quotes around it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put double quotes, and now I'm going to hit the command again, and now it found it. Now, it still shows it with a space because that's what the file name is. It has a space in it. But when you actually need to use it with a command, you've got to have double quotes around it. So to get back to the part I was talking about where the Windows command line and the graphical interface don't care about upper and lower case, I typed in Miller Mark Word Exam version 10, and oh, ouch, my mistake. Okay, I already had typed it all in lowercase. I got used to having uppercase characters for my name in there so much I forgot that one I had typed in all in lowercase. Alright, bad example. So let's just simply, we'll change it. We have several other Miller Mark Word Exam V's, so I can just recall the command, substitute one of those. So let's do V2. That has uppercase character, the first letter of my first and last name, the first letter of Word. So I still have the entire file name is still in lowercase. So hit enter and it finds it. And it does display the correct file name with upper and lowercase. So even though, yes, you can create files that have mixed upper and lowercase, as far as the command line and the graphical interface is concerned, it doesn't care. The upper and lower case is basically for you to make it nicer to read. Now, as you can see, as far as spaces go, they do cause a little bit of a problem, and you do have to remember to use double quotes around them. So my advice is, when you're working in the command line on Windows, Um, and you know that you're going to be creating some temporary files or permanent files even for troubleshooting. You want to keep your file names fairly short uh, and no spaces, just to make it easier on you so you don't have to type in more characters than you need to. Now, fairly short is kind of a relative term. This name, Miller Mark Word Exam v2.docx, is about 30 characters if I remember correctly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Yes, you do count the dot. 26, 27, 28, 29. So yeah, just about 30 characters, and the file that was V10 would have been 30 right on the nose. So 30 to 40 characters for your file names is, I would say, is reasonable, and doesn't take that long to excuse me, to type in by hand. Now, when you're only using the graphical interface, you could have longer because all you need to do is type it in once and then double click on it, or right click on the file name, so you're not doing as much typing. But for the command line purposes, you want to keep them fairly short. 30 is probably about the maximum that you want to go if possible. Now, to get back to file extensions, .docx, well, let me scroll back up to get the full list here. So we have a lot of different file extensions, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of file extensions. So what do they do? What are they used for? File extensions have always been used for the same purpose. They identify what application created that file. So let me just click back on the graphical interface here just to show you. So as I scroll down here, you see that the icons listed here have a W in front or in the icon, identifying this as a Word document, and the little pop-up also identifies this as a Microsoft Word document. Now, we go down a little bit further. This is identified as a Microsoft Excel worksheet. Orders.pdf is considered simply a PDF file. Now, it doesn't give you any other description than that in this case, because PDF is universally known as the type of file format that allows you to distribute documentation, can't be altered, unless you have the PDF Creator program. Now, how does it know to use those icons, these file extensions? When we look at the registry and the troubleshooting part, you will see that file extensions are kept as a list in the registry, and the Windows graphical interface references that registry to figure out what application created a file, so that when you do double click on it, the file or the application will open that particular file. Now, I said earlier that you don't have to create a file name with a file extension. That's true. However, the graphical interface is not going to know what application to use to open that file. And if you do create file names without a file extension, you really need to keep those files just containing text information with no formatting codes. Remember, when you create a Word document, you can change the font size, you can have colors, and all sorts of other stuff. So that's all formatting information, so the format itself is not plain text with no other special codes in them. So a file like .txt, that's just a file that contains plain text with no other formatting codes. This file I created just fooling around, test.1, is also just a text file. the system will, weirdly enough, display the .1 even though technically it's a file extension. And I'll explain more about that. Well, I can explain what's going on there now. So here, there's a check mark in the file, in the graphical interface. And this is Windows 8.1, by the way. So here for Windows 8.1, there's actually under View, there's a checkbox you can use to hide or show file name extensions. So when I uncheck that, give it a minute to redraw the screen, the file extensions all go away, except for the .1. The reason for that has to do with the way it defines hiding or showing hiding or showing file extensions. Now, under Windows 8.1, you do have another way of turning off and turning on the viewing of the file extensions. In Windows 7, there is an option in the Windows Explorer window in the File menu. I believe it's called Configure, if I remember right, without having a picture in front of me. When you click Configure, you get your little menu, and then in the menu you have a menu item. In the drop-down menu, you have a menu item called Change Folder and Search Options. So, when you click on this, in 8.1, you get the exact same window you would if you were using Windows 7. So, you want to click on the View tab, and then let me scroll down just a touch to have this up higher. The actual option is hide extensions for known file types, and .1, although is technically a file extension, it's not a known file type. Where does it get the list of known file types? From the registry. Alright, so if I uncheck this, because I personally don't want to hide the file extensions, and then I click OK, all the file extensions come back in the graphical interface. You notice up here that this gets automatically checked as well. So for 8.1, you actually have two ways of changing that option. But even though we're talking about command line, I wanted to just kind of go over what file extension means and give you examples of why they're important. And I did have to use the graphical interface a little bit to demo that. Now, in the PowerPoint slideshow, on page or slide 4, I do give you a web address that can show you a list of all sorts of different file extensions. And let me bring up Firefox. I may regret this in a little bit if it takes too long to load. That's what I get for not planning. I should have had this up and ready to go. All right. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the address of the site listed in the PowerPoint. So filext.com. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to use a search. And what I'll do up here is I'll just type .docx, even though I already know it's a Word document, file extension, and we'll do search. File extension .docx details. So let me go down here You don't want to get the download, but you can actually get a lot of different file extensions. So if I click under D, okay, so you can click on D, and as you can see, there's a lot of different file extensions, not just docx. Now, file extensions used to be only 3 characters long, but for a while now you can have longer than that, and here's an example, this D2W model file extension. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down so that you can see what it says for docx. This is just the D's. And you see there are some that are duplicated. There is no clearinghouse where you go to and you can say, okay, I'm using this file extension, nobody else can use it. Excuse me. So a lot of people, for instance, can use DOC, which is the old Windows Word format. I'm looking for DOCX. Scroll down here. There it is. DOCX. Word Microsoft Office Open XML format document from Microsoft Corporation. So it gives you more information about what that's used for. Alright, so let me minimize this. So if you have a file extension that if you view them and you see and you don't know what it is, you can go to that website and get more information. Now, that's what .lnk is for, that's the file extensions that is used for shortcuts. PNG is used for a particular type of graphics format. BAT right here is for scripts. ZIP for zipped files is a compression format, and on and on and on. So there are a lot of different file extensions out there, as just a brief look on that website can show you. Why would you want to look if you're not troubleshooting? You probably don't every day. But if you're suspicious about a file, you can get more information about it and make sure it was created by an application that you're actually using. Okay, now, I already told you about file names shouldn't contain spaces, but there are some characters you cannot use, whether you're in the graphical interface or whether you are in the command line. And I'm just going to type them out here, get a couple of spaces. So you cannot use the less than sign. And we'll actually be talking a little bit later, excuse me, why. Because it serves, and basically it serves a special purpose in Windows and in the command line. So type over a little more space. You can't use the greater than sign for the same reason. You can't use the colon, the 2 dots, one above each other. You can't use double quotes. That one's fairly obvious, since you use double quotes to surround a file name that has some special characters in it, like a space. You can't use a slash. That has to do with directories, and when we get to part 3 about directories, we'll talk more about that. You can't use what's called the backslash, and that's a character that's immediately above your enter key. Space over more. You can't use a vertical separator bar, and that's a shift character above the backslash above your enter key. And one thing I should let you know is if you have an older computer with an older graphics card, this bar could show as two vertical dashes separated by a little space. Again, most of the time nowadays you'll see it solid like this, but if you do have an older computer, it could show up as two separate vertical bars, one above the other. Alright, now, last two characters, a question mark, which we'll be talking about in a little bit, and an an asterisk. The question mark and asterisk are called wildcard characters, and we'll actually be talking about those in a little bit. So, let me just finish. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break this up into separate videos. So I'm just about done with this first video. I just want to wind up by talking about file extensions just a little bit more. Originally, file names were called 8.3 file format. That means you had 8 characters you could use for the file name, followed by a period, and then the 3 characters for the file extension. So 8, file name, dot, and then 3. So obviously that's changed quite a bit, and the entire file length that you had available to you was 12 characters. Now, oddly enough, Windows still keeps track of that 8.3 file name format. So, why? I'm not sure. Originally, it was because some people still had older programs that would save their files using that 8.3 file name format. But that's been a long time ago. Starting with Vista, probably. Definitely Windows 7, definitely Windows 8 and 8.1, and probably still in Windows 10. Those programs won't run anyway. So I'm not quite sure why Windows is still keeping track of that. Now, since I haven't played with Windows 10, it's possible Windows 10 does not keep track of that. But there's one way to check and find out. There is an option to the dir command, or I should say a switch to the dir command, called /x. So I'm going to just hit a couple of, returns here, enters here, to get some more space. And then I'm going to type dir space /x. And what the /x tells dir to do is to display file information including the 8.3 file name. And here we go. So, here's our file names. Severely truncated, so you have delta AA for delta adjunct with it's called a tilde sign, followed by the number 1, then the 3-character file extension. So notice what it does here. Even though my file, for instance, here is called delta_welcome.html, it truncates even the file extension down to the original 3 characters. Also know, whereas you can have upper and lower case characters in all your file names and the file extensions, as far as 8.3 goes, your file name has to be in uppercase characters, including the file extension. It has a particular scheme that determines how a file name is truncated down, but as you can see, with only 8 characters for a file name, good luck figuring out which file is which. So you had to get really good at including characters, and a lot of times what you would see, especially on Word documents, is in a footer for that document. One of the things would be the actual file name as found on disk. So Again, I have no idea why Windows still is keeping track of this, but it is. So it'd be interesting to see if anybody wants to try the /x command with dir if they have Windows 10, and they can see if it's still supported in Windows 10. Supposedly, Microsoft was getting rid of a lot of old code. We'll see if they got rid of that. At any rate, this is where I want to stop this particular video. So when I start the next video, we'll be talking about wildcards. Thanks.